Ο επόμενος ομιλητής μας, ο Dr. Wolfgang Wodarg, είναι Γερμανός γιατρός και ειδικός στον τομέα της υγείας. Είναι επίτιμο μέλος της Κοινοβουλευτικής Συνέλευσης του Συμβουλίου της Ευρώπης, ενώ υπήρξε επικεφαλής της Επιτροπής Υγείας και αναπληρωτής πρόεδρος της Σοσιαλιστικής Κοινοβουλευτικής Ομάδας. Πρώην πολιτικός για την υγεία, εκκινητής και εκπρόσωπος της Επιτροπής Μελέτης Ethics and Law of Modern Medicine, συγγραφέας και λέκτορας Πανεπιστημίου. Dr. Wodarg, good morning. Yes. Can you hear us?
Good morning to everyone. Very honored to be with you. I hope you had a good conference up to now already. And I'm very pleased to see Dr. Bhakti, Professor Bhakti here too. So we exchange our opinions rather often, and in a written way, or in we met already. So I think it is very important. It's a very important time because I have the impression that the image of what is happening is just turning a little bit. So there are more and more doctors all over the world, not only in Europe, and that are critical and that ask questions. In USA, in Great Britain, in Belgium, in Austria, and in Germany, and I think in many other countries, there are more and more scientists and more physicians that start daring asking questions. I think the task you have as a scientific, it is that you always doubt. You never believe as a scientific. You always doubt. Okay. And it is professional doubt which shows that you are scientific. We know that when there is a very famous book by Heinz Förster, and he said objectivity is just an idea that's a crazy idea by people who think you can observe something without observers. So that means that from whatever perspective you look at something, you see it differently. And what we call truth in science is just what we agree on, what we all can see. So now there are some people who see COVID-19 and see all this differently. And the normal way to deal with such a problem that people see things differently is to meet as you meet now in Athens and just to exchange the opinions and to discuss and to put questions. The questions are the most important things. So my work always was the work of, as a general practitioner of public health. And when you want to make a good work for your people, as a public health doctor, you have to know a lot. And you have to read and to ask questions, and you have to look at science, because it's very important when you tell people to behave this way or that way. This is healthy, this is not healthy. You always do give some advice to a lot of people, and you have a big responsibility not to lie and to say the best thing you have found. So when I was observing what happened in 2005, 2006, it was the birds flu. I heard that there will be 30 million deaths perhaps from this new virus. And I said, why? How do they know? What is the risk? And I traveled to Geneva, to WHO, and asked Mr. Stör, who was responsible, who told this. He was the leader of this campaign in WHO. And I asked him, what's your evidence? Why do you tell us there will be so many dead people? But he just gave me a CD. And on the CD was something written about the results of some experiments of a new drug against birds flu. This was Tamiflu. And he gave this to me. It was from Gilead Science. And he could not give me any evidence why this bird flu should be very dangerous. So, and the bird flu was ridiculously, there are about 600 people in all those 15 years since now that have died from bird flu. And this is people who have a very weak immune system, or have a very, very strong contacts with many thousand birds in the same time, who work in such a bird's farm. So very few cases, and there was no epidemic ever, a human epidemic. But there were, for some 100 million euros, Germany bought Tamiflu and put it somewhere in some store, and there it was for several years. And when I came to Africa, in Guinea, in Conakry, it was raining. And I went out of a health station, and outside in the rain, there was such a pile. It was packed in plastic, and I saw it was Tamiflu. It was standing in the rain in Africa somewhere. Nobody, for luck, good luck, has ever used it. And the next time I had made an experience was in 2009. It was in April. I heard in the radio and I saw on television pictures from Mexico. People who were disguised in plastic with disinfectants. They were spraying everywhere. And I was curious what is happening now. And it was the swine flu. And I started making research on it. Okay. Yes, and I found out they only had 460 cases of that. And Mr. Ferguson from London, he made a calculation. He multiplied the 460 cases with all the passengers flying from Mexico City all over the world. And he made a big scene. He made a big graphic for WHO, which looked terrifying. And he just made some calculations. As he said, there will be millions of deaths again. And I heard the same story with swine flu as I heard with bird flu some years before. I was in the German parliament in that time. And I asked questions then, and nobody listened. And the Minister of Health, they told the German people that there are 50 million doses of vaccines and nobody has to be afraid. They bought the vaccines from GlaxoSmithKline. They bought the vaccines from Novartis, 25 million in Germany. In Japan, they bought 100 million doses of this. I phoned to Australia, I phoned to Japan. I have friends, epidemiologists all over the world. We have a network. And I heard it was in all countries, it was the same. They all prepared for a big, big pandemic, and they all bought vaccines. And I short this a little bit. I opposed it because it was a pandemic vaccine, which was very quickly tested, and it was not observed long enough to find out whether it would be there would be severe side effects. They observed it in the EMEA only for 6 months, and this is not enough for a completely new vaccine with a dose which was one tenth of the vaccination dose of the antigen, and this was boosted by some pharmaceutic additives which should stimulate the immune system. And this stimulating the immune system is a dangerous thing. It may cause autoimmune diseases and other side effects. So I knew this and I published this, but in Germany nobody really listened. And the situation was a little bit like the situation in USA now. It was just in the election campaign when all this happened. So everything you say as a politician in this time, people don't believe. They always think what you say it only because you want to be elected. So I was not elected, but I was still in the Council of Europe. I was the president of the Health Committee of the Council of Europe in Strasbourg. It is the Council of Europe, where Greece also is a member, and you have delegations of all nations, but the Council of Europe is bigger than the European Union. Russia and Turkey and Georgia, and they are all members there. There are 47 members. And I was the president in the Health Committee. And we made this hearing, and the people from the WHO came, and we made a hearing there, a political hearing, and we questioned them why they did it. And we found out there was big corruption and dependence from money from pharmaceutical industries and from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and all of such donors who are financing the WHO. WHO, 80% of the finance of WHO comes from private or is extra money, not the regular money coming from the states, but is earmarked money. So organizations give money to WHO for certain purpose to deal with certain topics, and this is shaping a lot what the WHO does and what they do not do. Yes, and this experience with the birds flu, with the swine flu, and others, there were more. The time is not enough to tell it all. So I have lots of experience with conflicts of interest with the pharmaceutical industry and how they influence governments to pay a lot of money for things that are not useful. They frighten the people and then they drive the governments, because when you frighten the public, the politicians have to do something. And then they say, oh, we have some vaccine, we have some drug. And they did it with the swine flu, they did it with the birds flu, and they earned a lot of money. And this is why I was asked by Transparency International, which is an anti-corruption organization, to continue my work in this organization. And since 2010, I'm the president of a working group against corruption in the health system. And I'm also member of EHFCN, which is the European Health and Fraud, Corruption and Fraud against an organization against corruption and fraud in the health system. And I was very pleased that Greece also is a member. The Greece EOP, it is the experience is also member in this organization. So I was twice in Athens. And the president now, the actual president, he's a Greek guy. He is president of this organization, and we work together there. And now when it started in this year, when it started in Wuhan, I was very much sensibilized. I was listening immediately what was going on there. I saw the same pictures that I've seen in Mexico before. And so I was immediately trying to find out what was happening in China. And I found out that WHO had already found out the sequence of the SARS-CoV-2, and the complete sequence of the virus. They had it, and that a German professor, Professor Drosten, that he has already given some primer or some sequence which you could use to detect this virus. He proposed it to WHO, and it was immediately accepted. This happened at the 13th of January already. So not even 2 weeks after the Chinese made the alarm. And Professor Drosten always says he never had the virus. He only had the sequence in a computer. And with this computer sequence, he made the test. So he took 2 parts of the virus, of the molecules of the RNA, and with those parts, he described this is the typical virus. When you find those 2 parts, then you have the SARS virus. And the Chinese called it SARS-CoV-2 because there was already a SARS coronavirus in 2002. And from 2002 on, there is a big gap. There was only MERS and SARS when we speak about coronavirus, those 2 periods. But the virus does not disappear. The virus every month changes, is modified, is crossing with other viruses, and is adapting and to find a niche where the virus can survive, and is running around the globe. Always when there is winter, those respiratory viruses go there. Now they have been in Australia, and they will come again in winter to Europe. And then they go around the globe every year, and coronavirus is always one part of it. I'm a specialist for hygiene, public health, and for lung diseases. So I know exactly what I'm talking about. And we know that those viruses make an immune reaction in the people where they grow.
Ξέρουμε ότι αυτοί οι ιοί προξενούν μια ανοσοποιητική αντίδραση στους ανθρώπους τους οποίους μολύνουν.
And there is a short-term immune reaction, which is with immune globulin A and M and G, A and G, immune globulin A and G, which is a short-term reaction. It disappears after some weeks or months. And there's a long-term reaction, which is a cellular reaction with the T cells, the memory cells and this stays a long time. In Germany, there were in Tübingen, in the University of Tübingen, they made a trial. They just took blood samples from old blood donors from last year. And they examined the immunity they could find against coronaviruses. And they found out that 81% of those blood donors had a cellular cross-immunity against coronaviruses. And this cellular immunity is not specific on one type of coronaviruses. It is a cross-immunity. And this is why we have a herd immunity everywhere around the globe of about 80%, 60 to 80%. There is a herd immunity, the cellular herd immunity. And we get an update of our immune memory each year. And some people have lost, if you are very old and you don't have contact with children, you don't get this update and you forget this immunity. And then you are weak and you may be ill and you're the one who is endangered then. And when you have a look around the world, and mostly it is pediatric research what was done on coronavirus, because in the pediatric, the pediatrists are very interested when the small children get pneumonia or get something very serious, they find out which virus it is. And lots of research is done in this field. And I made this research in the end of February and the beginning of March. And I published in February, in 26 or so, I published one page, a big, I had an essay in a German newspaper where I could really openly say what was happening, and that we always can calculate between 5 and 15% of the population will get coronavirus each year. And when you see there are some institutes who make a very good observation, a monitoring of the viruses existing, respiratory viruses coming each year. And the best work I saw was from Glasgow. The Glasgow people, they made it for several years, and they had metapneumovirus, they had RV virus, they had para-influenza, they had influenza, and they had coronavirus in their program. I think they observed about 10 different respiratory viruses for many years. And you can see that they always come, and after the top, you find the most cases of coronavirus infections coming together with influenza A. And when people were sick in hospital and they were examined for those viruses, they found out that about 50%, half of those where they found coronaviruses, there was some other virus in the same time. There are about 100 viruses that are in competition. We observe about 10 of them. We have to have an ecological view on this. When you imagine a meadow I was in Greece and I saw all those beautiful flowers already in February growing. All those rose and white flowers everywhere. And after some time, there are some other flowers growing in a different color. And there is never one plant alone. There is always competition of plants. And they have their season. And the meadow changes. It is the same with the mucosa we have in our mouth and in our nose and in our body. There are different viruses in competition. And when you kill one of them, and when you take away one by vaccination against influenza, the others have more space. And what we observe this year is the same we could have observed all over the world all the other years, but we did not observe. Some only Glasgow, only 2 places in the world had a view, were looking at corona, because coronaviruses were never very important. Because they were not important, because everyone was looking to influenza, because influenza, there was a vaccine. So we observed influenza to shape the vaccine for next year. And the other viruses were of no interest by any industry or scientists, because it happened every year. We could not influence it. So this is about virology and immunology. And now I switch, and I am the epidemiolog. So when I look and I try to find out, where can I see whether people get ill or not? Are there more people with certain symptoms or not? And are they in the ambulances? Are they in the hospitals? Where are they? How old are they? Are they only in one country, or are they in many countries the same? So there is no virus that stops at the frontier. When you see the aeroplanes, you know there is a flight radar, and you see all the planes going around, thousands of planes around the globe every day. This happens every year, every day, and nobody looked for any virus normally. And now we start looking at one virus. We look at, as the rabbit looks at the snake, we are paralyzed by staring at this one virus. But the other viruses are there as every year. So we look how many people get ill. And then we have the test, the PCR test. It is very easy to make a PCR test for any virus. We could have PCR test for metapneumovirus, or for one of those 100 viruses. We could search for all of them. And we call it, in science, we call it attention bias. What we observe is just attention. Yeah, it's just a selection of what we could observe. We could observe many things, but we just concentrate on one spot. And this we found out. We are searching with this instrument, with the PCR. We are going around looking for some parts of some virus. And the PCR does not say anything about an infection, because the infection is the reaction of our body. The virus is not the infection, but what is called infection is the reaction of our body when something happens with it. And when we know all this scientific research, what is done on coronaviruses, we know there have been always between 5 and 15% of the population infected by coronaviruses every year. And this is exactly what we find this year too. When you make 1 million tests, 5 to 50% positive in the flu season. And when you make many tests, you have more positive people. And when you make a test in a hospital where the ill people are, you have a bigger percentage. When you make a test in the doctor's ward, you have a higher percentage. When you make a test in the normal population, you have a lower percentage. This is normal. And when the flu wave is over, and there is a very low prevalence, that means as every year coronavirus disappears, as influenza disappears, and the rhinovirus comes. So the flowers change in the meadow. And we see exactly this. But when you have a test which has a certain false positive, false negative rate, then you can make it many tests. So if the false positive rate is about, let's say 1% in average, we have very different tests now. Some are better, some are worse. But if you say average 1%, it's easy to calculate. Then you make 100 tests and you have one positive, which has no virus. It's positive, but there is no virus because it's false positive. And when there are only few people in the populations, and you make 100,000 tests in a week, you will find 1,000 cases, because 1% of them is false positive. Nobody is ill. Nobody has the virus. Only the test tells you, because you make so many, there is 1% false. And this is 1,000 cases. And they are all healthy. They are all healthy. Then nobody is ill. So this is one thing. And then people say, oh yes, people die. And this is right. They die each flu season. Many people die, mostly weak people and very old people. The average age of those victims of flu is about 80 years. So it means when you're old and the time to die comes, very often it is the flu who takes you over the river. And what we see now is that people were afraid. And they had panic because they were told there is something extraordinary. And they all have to be afraid. And when you're afraid and you care for old people, or when the old people are not cared enough, and the doctor, and they want to be sure that nothing happens because there is a big danger, there's some coronavirus, which is dangerous. So they bring the old people to the hospital. This is no problem in Germany because we have too many hospital beds. But this is a big problem in some other parts of Europe. This is very different. And in some regions where the panic was bigger and where there were other factors, because, in Italy, for instance, they had many nurses from Eastern Europe in their families and in the asylums for old people, and they all had gone home. There were very little stuff. The old people were without care. And there was a panic, and many people were sent into hospital. And I think that we have to put several questions. The most important question I put, and I did it with some doctors in Italy and in Europe, all over Europe. We made and also Mr. Kennedy, he was signing this question. He was signing this letter for the Europe. We want to send it to the European Commission. Because there is a very, very interesting question that says, why? If it is the same virus, why do the people in Madrid and London and in northern Italy, why did they die? So was there such a big panic? And why was it such dramatic things happening there? And in other parts of in some parts of Germany, nobody really experienced anything. Nothing special happened, and there were no more ill people, no more people dying than normally. Why were there such big differences when it is the same virus? This is the most important question to answer. We need European science on this. And I think it is important to find out how the test was used in Europe. And what is the quality of the tests? We have 300 or more different test systems. Each laboratory can make its own test. There is no accreditation, European accreditation. It's not a medical product, but it is just some in-house test which is used. And it's not one, but it's many different in-house tests and many different qualities. Some are very, very strongly false positive. Others are very good. So it's very, very different what happens. And this, if you examine people dying, and in Italy they even made the test with people who were already dead, then you can find, when you have a test which has a false positive rate of 10% or so, you find many people and you always say, oh, this was corona. And it's so you have to find out what was the influence of those different pictures we have in Europe. Was it the different practice of the test? Or how can you explain all this? I think we can guess now, but we don't know it. But one thing we can know, that if there is a virus, yes.
Can I translate?
Okay. Yes, okay. Sorry. I have written down these questions for the European Union, and I have specified my questions, 3 questions. And I will send them to you in English so that you can read them, each of you. And I would be very pleased if you send the same questions to the European Union, and if you send it to your government that they asked also to the European Union, please, to explain the differences, why in some countries the same virus made such a very different effect than in the neighbor country, which is just 20 miles away. This is not normal. This is not the virus who makes the difference. It is what happens in society.
Θα πρέπει δυστυχώς να κλείσουμε τη σύνδεση με τον Dr. Wodarg, να τον ευχαριστήσουμε θερμά που ήταν μαζί